Hello, welcome back to Levant TV's press review on this Monday, the 11th of November from London. Let's start with our UK headlines. The Times leads its front page news with reports on hundreds of key posts being left vacant in the accident and emergency departments as an increasing amount of senior doctors are opting to move abroad. It also reports on the typhoon which swept through Southeast Asia, which killed more than 10,000 people. And The Guardian leads its front page with the headline "Destruction and Desperation" as it reports on a looting beginning after Typhoon Haiyan. It also reports on a document released by the Department of Energy and Climate Change, which says it's a major state subsidy scheme for the UK's gas-fired power station is being designed. And The Independent leads its front page with a picture of Tacloban city in the center of the Philippines, headlined "The Day After the Typhoon." It also reports on a fund managers controlling billions of pounds invested in UK energy companies, warning that they are considering pulling out of the sector because of political interference. The Daily Telegraph today centres a photo of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II from Remembrance Sunday service at the Cenotaph in central London. The paper leads its front page with a report on former Prime Minister Sir John Major criticising that every single sphere of British influence in society is dominated by men and women who went to private school and who are from the affluent middle class. It also reports on the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, saying the absurd and ridiculous pressure to have a perfect Christmas puts relationships under strain and spoils life. Now let's take a look at the top stories in the Middle East. Al Monitor, which headlines its article "Iran nuclear deal key to political solution in Syria," says that despite significant progress in the Geneva nuclear talks over the weekend, time may be short given the opposition of Israel and some in Congress, with implications for Syria. It says negotiations with Iran are not just essential to implementing safeguards to assure that the Islamic Republic does not produce a nuclear weapon. Iran is also critical to progress in regional security, beginning with Syria. Iran has offered time and again to help end the war. And the Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif told Al Monitor on September the 30th that if we resolve the nuclear issue, it will pave the way for the resolution of other issues. It adds that their columnist Fahim Tastikin reported from the meeting of Syrian National Coalition of Syrian Revolutionary and Opposition Forces about whether to attend the Geneva II peace conference on Syria. Tastikin wrote that the SNC sources told him that Saudi Arabia is impeding the Geneva II talks in retaliation for US rapprochement with Iran. For the Saudis, the SNC has become the arena to settle scores with the United States. The article notes that Saudi Arabia may be finding itself increasingly isolated in its hardline backing for a military solution in Syria. Turkey, for example, is signaling a newfound pragmatism in its regional approach because of its failed policies in Syria. To conclude, it adds that it's worth noting that the Obama administration's policies of avoiding military involvement in Syria and engaging Iran have strong popular support, at least according to the last two polls taken in late September. It adds that a CBS News New York Times poll reported that 68% of Americans do not believe the US has a responsibility to get involved in the war in Syria. From Moscow, Russia today reports on Syrian opposition agrees to attend Geneva talks with preconditions. The article reports that the Western-backed Syrian opposition group has agreed to participate in international peace talks, outlining conditions that must be met before they attend in Geneva, the group said in a statement. Although the regime has rejected any preconditions for the Geneva talks, Russia today reports that the creation of transitional ruling body in which the current government should not have a role remains the opposition's main goal. Russia today adds that Moscow blamed the group for attempting to revise key elements of the Geneva Communiqué of 2012, the only platform to achieve a political settlement in Syria, and undermine the Geneva II conference. It refers to the Russian Foreign Ministry, who says that the SNC has no real influence on the ground, should not be used as an umbrella for the entire opposition in Syria, as it says there is no evidence to suggest that the coalition is the sole legitimate representative of either all Syrian people, even the opposition as a whole. It reiterates that Russia has long insisted that the Syrian opposition should formally agree to attend Geneva talks without any preconditions, and that is what was the West's responsibility to force them to form a delegation. From The Independent, Robert Fisk says mass migrants are nothing new in the Middle East, but the sheer numbers involved are having devastating effects. In an article titled, "Polio has broken out in Syria and 20 million children to be vaccinated." Robert Fisk analyzes Afghan immigrants who fled to Syria to escape their nation's crisis, who says theirs must be the most hideous nightmare, for most of them are Shia Muslims, despised by the Taliban and now by the Sunni rebels trying to overthrow Bashar al-Assad's government. Noting that President Assad is an Alawite, a branch of the Shia sect, Fisk says these Afghans are regarded as pro-regime by the Syrian opposition and accused of siding with the government. At least 10, I'm told, have been killed by car bombs and bullets. Fisk adds that now that this miserable community is appealing to the generosity of Canada to help them, perhaps Canada can save them, certainly the rebels will not. And Fisk adds, I find myself wondering what catastrophic effects these mass migrations are having on the Middle East, destroying whole societies, ripping up tribal and family identities, turning the peoples of the Muslim and Christian world into huge armies of homeless and broken people. Fisk looks at the polio breaking out in Syria with 20 million children across the Middle East, including Egypt, who needed to be vaccinated. He says Egypt is giving Syrian refugees a rough time, favored by Mohammed Morsi. Before the army chucked him out, Syrian refugees could access Egyptian healthcare and education. He adds that Morsi, of course, supported the rebels in Syria and broke off relations with Assad, one reason perhaps why the US smiled upon him, although the Americans may not have noticed his relationship with the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood. Fisk says that the refugees who try to reach Europe or Australia are people smuggled, reduced to starvation and raped. Fisk also asks what new harshness of spirit will spring from all this torment. Sweden perhaps understands this with its generosity towards the Syrians. Maybe Canada will help the Afghans of Damascus, but I fear the world, scarcely blameless amid all the sorrow, will close its borders tighter and blame the victims for their own desperation. France's role in the unraveling of an international deal to curb Iran's nuclear program brought angry reactions Sunday from Tehran. Despite intense negotiations in Geneva, French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius objected, saying the terms of a preliminary accord were too easy on Tehran. Many nations fear Iran has been secretly seeking a nuclear weapons capability, despite its claims to want nuclear power only for energy and medical purposes. Let's look at what some analysts are saying. Iranian-Israeli Middle East analyst Meir Javed writes for Al Monitor an article headlined, "For France, Iraq is a deal killer," analyzing the Iranian nuclear program. Javed says as important as trying to reach a negotiated settlement with Iran is, it is also important, if not more important, that such a deal creates confidence on both sides. Javed points out that building the Iraq heavy water reactor, which could produce plutonium to make a bomb while the talks continue, fails to create confidence. It does the opposite. It creates the impression that Iran is interested in maintaining the option of making a bomb if and when it decides to do so while the talks are taking place. He claims that what reinforces concern and urgency regarding Iraq is that the Iranian regime has not allowed the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, to visit the site since 2011. Javed, however, does not believe that this to be the only reason why the French insisted on taking a tougher line against Iran. Javed states that during the era of reformist President Mohammad Khatami, France and Iran had relatively good relations. Khatami, in fact, visited Paris in 1999. Furthermore, new Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, as Iran's chief nuclear negotiator from 2003 to 2005, secured an agreement with France. However, a lot has happened since then. First was President Nicolas Sarkozy's request in 2007 to meet up with Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, which was turned down. Sarkozy was then publicly insulted by the Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who called him young and inexperienced. Also, the writer claims that Iran's supplying weapons to the Taliban to kill French soldiers after Sarkozy had tried to meet with Khamenei is likely to have gone down very badly in Paris. Relations between the two sides got worse after the arrest of Clotilde Reiss, a then 23-year-old French teaching assistant who was accused of being a spy and arrested during the 2009 post-election demonstrations in Iran. Reiss' public trial broadcast on Iranian TV apparently infuriated senior French officials, thus pushing France away from Iran even more. She was released in May 2010. Javendefar believes that there is also the Israeli angle. Thanks to Iran's actions that drove France away, Israel has found a country in the P5+1 which is taking a tougher line than everyone else, especially the United States. Yet Javendefar sees that France is not acting on Israelis' behalf. It's taking a tougher line because, for now, it also serves its own interests. Such interests have created a temporary common interest with Israel. And to conclude, Javendefar says, despite the delay France has created in the talks its demand for a halt of construction of Iraq, which is fair and logical, Iran believes that imposing new sanctions during talks undermines them and hurts confidence. So does building a reactor, which could produce bomb-making plutonium. The Tehran Times also looks at the same story in an article headlined, France ruined its image in Geneva. The paper looks in depth at why France failed to reach a deal on the Iranian nuclear program in Geneva. The article starts with saying that there were high hopes that the chief diplomats of Iran and the 5+1 group in the United States, Russia, Britain, France, China and Germany would strike a deal on Tehran's nuclear program in Geneva on Saturday. However, French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius prevented the talks from yielding the desired result. According to the Tehran Times, Fabius claimed that the concerns of regional countries should be taken into consideration in a nuclear deal with Iran. However, Tehran Times states that Iran has adopted a new approach in order to allay concerns about its nuclear program in the region and the rest of the world, which gives the lie to the French foreign minister's claims. Tehran Times points out that if Fabius meant the concerns of Israel, it is common knowledge that Israel is making every effort to prevent a resolution of the dispute over Iran's nuclear program. If this is the case, Fabius was dancing to the tune of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The paper goes on to say, however, if Fabius was using France's position as a member of the 5+1 group to pressure Iran over its policy toward the Syrian conflict, his approach was irresponsible. The paper continues to say that Mr. Fabius may be opposed to the government of Syria's President Bashar al-Assad, but he knows that Syria has been turned into a battleground for extremists affiliated to al-Qaeda, and if the situation gets out of control, it will adversely affect France. The writer refers to Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif saying Tehran is ready to use its influence to help get the foreign forces to leave Syria in order to resolve the crisis, which is in line with the interests of France. The Tehran Times sees that the international community has been concerned about the possibility of a new conflict in the Middle East and thus has been waiting for an opportunity to end the decade-long nuclear dispute between Iran and the West. So Paris should not oppose the will of the rest of the world. The Tehran Times also sees that the Iranian people did not expect such a move from France. They expected Fabius, who is a member of a socialist government, to make efforts for the negotiations to be successful and not to cause another impasse. And to conclude, the Tehran Times says that the now Iranians have a bad image of France, but Paris can still make amendments for its actions at the next round of the nuclear talks, which begins on November the 20th. Robert Tate, Middle East correspondent for the British Daily Telegraph newspaper, writes an article headlined, Iran dubs France a gunslinging frog over nuclear deal failure. Here, Tate claims that after decades of training their sights on Britain, America and Israel, Iranian officials and commentators have found a new culprit, France. Tate says that France assumed the unfamiliar role of Iranian national villain on Sunday as senior officials and commentators in Tehran, long accustomed to spewing vitriol at Britain, America and Israel, blamed it for scuppering a deal on Iran's nuclear program. Tate claims that a chorus of anti-French bile over the failure to reach an agreement in Geneva appeared to have the endorsement of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, with a Twitter account run in his name and believed to have his approval leading the charge. French officials have been openly hostile towards the Iranian nation over the past few years. This is an imprudent and inept move, one tweet posted on the account Khamenei.ir. A second message accompanied by France hashtag declared a wise man, particularly a wise politician, should never have the motivation to turn a neutral entity into an enemy. The tweets reflected widespread Iranian anger at the role played by Laurent Fabius, France's foreign minister, in an indication that the Twitter messages accurately represented the supreme leader's views. The semi-official Fars News website linked to Iran's elite revolutionary guards reminded its readers that Ayatollah Khamenei had chided French officials for perceiving anti-Iran policies in a speech last March, marking the Iranian New Year. Tate refers to semi-official's Fars News website, which fell in with the prevailing anti-French sentiment in a commentary headlined "Difficult Negotiations in Geneva and the Gunslinging French Frog" in strident tones. The commentary accused France of looking like a frog that drew its gun to give it the feeling for being all-powerful. The writer also cites an editorial in the hardline Khaya newspaper, often sees as Ayatollah Khamenei's official mouthpiece, comparing France's conduct unfavorably with that of Britain, usually depicted as Iran's historical enemy by regime insiders. And to conclude, Tate quotes Hamid Reza Asifi, a former spokeswoman for Iran's foreign ministry, warning that France was not acting alone. Another is the external pressure that these 6 countries are under from the Zionist regime and other countries in the region. Now let's take a look at the top headlines from international papers. The Times of India leads with the headline, "Punjab most well off, Kerala equitable." And the Washington Post leads its front page with the headline, "The Philippines reeling after historic typhoon." And China's Global Times leads with the headline, "Reform 2 to be unveiled," as top officials from the CPC met to lay out a blueprint charting China's reform. And finally, the UAE's Gulf News leads its front page with the headline, "Haiyan horror," as UAE gives $10 million aid for Typhoon Haiyan. Thank you for staying with us today, and see you tomorrow for another press review.